right, hey, good morning, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Saturday, August 26, 2023. This is your morning update. Today, we are focusing on Invest 93L, our newly tagged tropical system down there in the southern Gulf of Mexico or Western Caribbean. Take your pick. It's sitting right on the border of, and that system still directly expected to impact Florida or the central Gulf Coast over the next couple of days next week. And we also have a few other issues in the Atlantic, but not much to worry about. We have Hurricane Franklin this morning that's going to shoot the gap between Bermuda and the eastern U.S. It's going to move on out to sea. It's still a tropical storm on the map, but it's going to be a hurricane at 11 a.m. We also have some slopping guff and nonsense out here, but it's really nothing to worry about right now. The only concern we do have at the present time is, of course, Invest 93L, and that will be the focus of our video this morning. National Hurricane Center's morning outlook at 8 a.m. does show a 90% chance of the system to develop, 70% in the next 48 hours. It's coming sooner than later. At this point, we're just talking more of a when than if. The storm bubbling up and around this morning down here in the region, there's some actually interesting cues here. Number one is that a lot of the system is actually staying offshore. One of the few key interactions we had to look at this morning was 93L going to kind of sit between the Yucatan and the coast and kind of be half on, half off land, or was it going to maybe try to develop a little more offshore? Oftentimes, these storms like to develop over the water just because there's less friction, and naturally, the storm tends to incline itself to move towards the water. And that is kind of what it's doing this morning. Notice a good, healthy amount of thunderstorms all sitting off the coast. And as we loop this morning, first visible satellite imagery does show some inflowing clouds from the south under that cirrus canopy. We have a little bit of a lazy kind of east-southeast kind of inflow right here, and we got a little bit more of a northeast flow over here. It's not particularly strong. I don't think this has got a closed low to it yet. We don't have any ASCAP passes or Hurricane Hunter data yet. We probably won't for a little while longer. So there's probably not a closed low center right here, but there definitely is some little mid-level rotation, and the low level is trying to start to consolidate. And this healthy thunderstorm activity will help quite a bit. This bubbling kind of convection you see both on the satellite and or the viz and over here on the IR. It's a lot like popcorn bubbling convection where these clouds, the reds and yellows, kind of stay where they are. That's often an indication of a strengthening tropical system. And when you see those little cloud tops bubbling like that, that's definitely an indication of something's going on. And it's kind of up under this kind of cirrus canopy this morning. Notice the cloud tops over on these clouds are moving to the north. The little edges of these clouds are moving off, but then the clouds in this really aren't. And you kind of have this frilly kind of little like fuzz on the edge of the thunderstorm tops. That means there's almost no wind shear over the storm. And the anticyclone aloft actually goes like this. And the belt of stronger winds is around 93L, but it's not actually in it. So in the upper levels, this big high rotates clockwise, but it's kind of holding it kind of like under its wing right now, which is actually helping the storm intensify a little bit. So watching this over the next day or two is going to be interesting to see where it pops up. It looks like the convection's waning a little bit this morning. It looks like it's going to hit the diurnal minimum over the next few hours. But basically, the story here this morning is 93L is on schedule for its expected development. There is some drier air more in the central Gulf that is going to slow it down a little bit. You can see some outflow boundaries racing out of a thunderstorm this morning, indicating that drier air, all part of that bigger heat wave. So it's not like it's got the coast completely clear, but it's going to have, it is definitely doing its thing this morning. So latest on the computer models this morning, no major changes to the forecast theory for now. There's been some adjustments in windshield wipering, but we're not going to get too much into that because the storm still hasn't fully developed, and I don't want to start playing the model game too much. But to illustrate the basic idea here is that 93L is going to sit near the Yucatan Peninsula for a couple more days. In fact, this is Monday morning on the European model, and the storm basically hasn't moved, but it will begin to move on Monday, and that's where we'll begin our show here. As you see by Monday evening, the storm is definitely starting to lift northward right about the same time Franklin does, no coincidence. And then it moves across the Gulf of Mexico on Tuesday, and then we're on the 6Z run, so I need to back this up. And then, it moves across the Gulf of Mexico Tuesday into Wednesday, and then Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, it makes landfall in the Big Bend of Florida. So for now, somewhere in western Florida remains the most likely landfall location. I don't think it's going to come much further south than Tampa. I think the southern peninsula of Florida definitely can get some some wind and some rain from this, but they won't be hammered with like the direct winds and direct impacts. And it's definitely not going to go any further than the Mississippi Louisiana border. But I mean, I think some of like Pensacola, Mobile, even over here, like by Biloxi, might still be in play as well. Some of the models have trended a bit further west this morning, so I don't want to rule you out completely. But the majority of the landfalls seem to be, for now, still striking somewhere between Steinhatchee and like Mexico Beach, Panama City, Apalachicola, Appalachia Bay seems to all be kind of like where most of the landfall points are. This is just the Europeans' latest guess this morning. It's been very consistent at this landfall location. The GFS model has kind of jumped around, and the latest GFS run this morning has this more westward and more northward. So just another idea of what it could maybe do. And again, that landfall intensity, both GFS and Euro operationally are still calling for kind of a mid-grade tropical storm. That's because there is some roadblocks in the future of 93L. So as I talked about a minute ago, the dry air across the Gulf of Mexico, well, wind shear might be an issue too. This is a wind shear map valid Tuesday morning, and you can see a couple days ago, if I back this up a little bit, this is over the weekend. Notice how, again, those belt of stronger winds wrap around the storm, but they're not actually really impacting the storm. As I go into Tuesday, it kind of careens right into this belt of westerly winds and probably is going to have some westerly wind shear to deal with. At the same time, as it comes northward into the Gulf of Mexico, dry air may also be an issue. There's a big pocket of dry air on the GFS and on the European model forecast in the Gulf of Mexico. This is not impossible by any stretch, as you have this dry continental high pressure feeding this. So if you have wind shear and you have some dry air, you definitely have some roadblocks for a developing tropical storm. Notice how Franklin over here, as a developed, well-built hurricane, has dry air all around it, but it doesn't really care because it's a well-developed hurricane and there's no wind shear to force this dry air into the storm. So the dry air just kind of wraps around Franklin. It doesn't really care. But when you have these like kind of fledgling, kind of developing tropical systems, they do definitely care about dry air being punched into them from the west by a belt of stronger winds. So it does appear that 93L is not going to have this picture perfect, pristine Gulf to go into like Laura or Ida or Ian did over the last couple of years. So for now, we are still thinking this may not be a big scale tipping monster Cat 3 plus hurricane. We're not thinking major hurricane right now. But this has to hold out. If it doesn't, and there is no dry air or very limited dry air and very limited wind shear, we could be in trouble because the sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico are outrageously warm right now. 30, 31 degrees Celsius, that is like mid to upper 80s. That is pretty not great, especially on that eastern Gulf, 31. There's probably some 32s hiding in there somewhere. If that dry air and wind shear does not show up as we expect it to, that could be a problem. Again, for now, our models think that's going to be there and it's going to be an issue. The biggest challenge forecast-wise in the short term is going to be, does 93L get strong enough while it's sitting by the Yucatan to kind of push back on that? Or is it kind of weak as it takes off and then it has to deal with those issues as it moves into the Gulf? We're going to see. Computer models this morning showing a wide range of solutions. Again, GFS has trended west of the euro. The GFS was all the way down here yesterday. Now it's trended on the other. It's flipped over the euro. It is now to the west of the euro. But again, it's largely showing those landfall points somewhere from the Big Bend to maybe even closer to Pensacola. But those seem to be the goalposts on most of the models. Our suite of models this morning, that we have this as an invest, we can use these models. And again, their first solid run is all showing like Appalachia Bay, kind of upper part of the Big Bend, maybe towards Tallahassee, and the such. HWRF model, as far as intensity goes, as far as potential landfall intensity, the 0Z run this morning shows a pretty good upper bounds. HWRF brings us in at 967 millibars, which is a healthy, probably category 2 hurricane, maybe even knocking on the door category 3. And the HWRF typically is high. It's definitely one of our models that really kind of goes for it. But it typically is a good indication of what a high-end sort of look on the storm could be. So that's one potential solution. It could definitely be weaker than this, but that is kind of showing you maybe the upper bounds of what we could expect, hopefully. I would show you the 6Z run, but it went out to lunch and like hit Miami or something, so we're not going to worry about it. And the intensity guidance, one more thing I wanted to point out, the most of the intensity guidance is bulked down here in the tropical storm range. However, one of the more important models, our SHIPS model, which is one the Hurricane Center does rely on quite a bit, has actually pushed already into category 1 and is actually close to category 2. That's a bit concerning itself. If the HWRF and the SHIPS are both showing much higher than the bulk of the guidance, that's eyebrow raising. It's not a cause to run for the hills, but it is eyebrow raising. So those models are typically pretty good at calling intensity and at least um, showing like that more upper limit, like I said, and that could be a bit of an indication this might get a little stronger than a tropical storm. So I would think right now a hurricane coming somewhere into the Big Bend on Wednesday that's still a bit lopsided. Again, it may kind of look a little funny, like if we look at the European landfall again on the relative humidity chart. It comes in, it's kind of got this kind of like half look to it, where there's some dry air on this side, but there's some heavier weather on the right side, and there's more wind on the right side and all that. But peak season, it could still be a hurricane. So that's kind of what I got for you guys this morning. We're going to know more once this really kind of gets going and develops. Once the hurricane hunters get out there, fly it, we find a center, we start tracking the center, da da da. Things will fall into place quick. But again, right now it looks like Wednesday is probably the landfall. But even by Tuesday evening, again, the coast could already be feeling some strong winds, adverse weather. We'll be talking storm surge, winds, tornadoes, rain, all that stuff when it comes time. The early thought on impacts: this does not look a prolific rainmaker. It will be moving pretty fast. Any storm like this, of course, can produce heavy rain and some localized flash flooding, but excuse me, I don't think it's going to be a big widespread flood maker because it's going to be moving so quick. Winds are definitely a concern. Tropical storm force winds, hurricane force winds, and some of the region are possible. Tornadoes are definitely possible across the peninsula of Florida on that right side where the heavier weather is. And storm surge will be a big concern along the coast of Appalachia Bay, Steinhatchee, very low lying, flat, wet area. So plenty of storm surge concerns for them as the storm moves in. Even if it's like a Cat 1, it could bring in some pretty hefty storm surge with it. We'll get all those graphics once we have a better idea of track and intensity, so we're not like just throwing out a guessing game. Again, my friends in Jacksonville, just keep your eyes open. I would be preparing as if you were going to get a tropical storm next week and then let it adjust from there. Small track adjustments make a big deal. If the storm goes more into like Tallahassee or westward and it misses you by 150 miles, you're just going to get a bunch of rain. If it comes in right in Steinhatchee and drives straight across the state, you're going to get a bona fide tropical storm, and probably a strong one at that. So remains to be seen. It could be another near miss, and I don't like to church these things up because I've done it a couple times and then they just whiffed. Our Dorians and Nicoles and Ians that all just whiff on our area at the last possible second. So I'm not going to go crazy with it, but just know there's still a lot of options on the table for you. Best thing I would do: gas up the car, get some groceries this weekend, make sure you don't have stuff laying around your yard that can blow around, and just kind of be prepared and be thinking about what you're going to need to do if this kind of leans more towards your area. So that's what I got for you guys this morning on your update. I'll have more out to you tomorrow and the next day and so on and so forth. So until then, as always, thanks for watching and have a good one.